Hello
Hi,
again.
Rachel. Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
Good. How are you?
I am good. Let me just put this a little bit more into the center, and
Get
then I think
your
we'll go ahead.
tripod. For those of
Yeah,
us just
exactly.
joining us, Stefan and I just had a little practice right before this, so we're getting our setups all correct, and I think we're good to go now.
Exactly.
Great, great. How are you doing today?
I am doing fine. I've actually been already part of a number of screen-based
Oh,
thingies. I normally try to reduce to sort of like keep it down to maximum one, but today I wasn't quite so successful.
well, thank you for joining us, and we'll kind of dive in here. So, keep the screen time to a minimum. For those of you just joining us, my name is Rachel Gallaher. I'm the deputy editor at Gray Magazine, international design magazine based in Seattle. And as part of our virtual design expo, it's a way expo we launched a few weeks ago as a way to keep people, connected in the design community in a time when we are unable to gather and, go to events and do all those things we love to do. And today we're very excited that we have Stefan Sagmeister, um,
Hello, hello.
filmmaker, graphic designer, man of all many talents. And he is joining us from New York, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I'm in downtown Manhattan, pretty much at the
Downtown
center
Manhattan.
of all of it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, hopefully you're, staying safe and healthy. And yeah, it's a tough time for everyone, but we're trying to focus on the positive.
Absolutely.
Great. So speaking of, the quarantine, I'd love to jump in and kind of just ask you, how have, things changed for you over the past month? And, do you have any tips for designers, architects, creative people who are trying to push forward with their business, as I said, during a time when you can't get together and have those meetings?
Well, I'd say from a sort of like everyday kind of perspective, I'm probably privileged in a number of ways. Maybe the main one is that uh, I did sabbaticals every 7 years throughout my entire working life, so
Right.
I'm very well equipped on how to work in a self-motivated basis. Not
Mm-hmm.
all of the sabbaticals I worked by myself, but there were very long parts of the sabbaticals where I did work by myself. So I'm quite well trained to that, and I have a lot of experience in, I don't know, how to make self motivation work properly. And then, of course,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, this is different from person to person. What works very well for me is to have a structure. That
Okay.
structure starts with being properly dressed. Uh, I did
No
not
pajamas?
dress.
No
I
working in your
did not dress
pajamas?
in a suit because I knew that we have a talk. But it, I don't know, like what I want to avoid is that my entire life becomes one big mush. Where I sit, where
Mm,
I do emails in bed, and I sit on the sofa
right.
and do half work or so. I want this to somewhat still be separate. Now, of course, I have the possibility. I have a beautiful studio upstairs from my home, so
Oh,
that
that's
is
nice.
comes in particularly handy. But even if you don't have that, I think that to have a space that is dedicated for work and that is
Okay.
there for that, and that I mean, in my case, I do it quite extreme. I really dress for it. Like when I'm working, I'm properly
Mm.
dressed. If the work is ending, I redress. And
Oh,
I
interesting.
like
Okay.
that. I like that difference in
The
between the two.
separation between the work and the leisure
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
That's a
And then from my sabbaticals point of view is that, see, in my first sabbatical, I thought that because I'm a big planner, I thought this I'm going to do without the plan. And
okay.
my plan was to have no plan. And it failed spectacularly, meaning like weeks
Oh,
into my
interesting.
first sabbatical, I had absolutely nothing to show for it. I got nothing done. And it
Okay.
turned out when I looked back on it that I basically was just busy with busy work. In a way, I became
Mm,
my own intern. Like, I was uh,
yeah.
bringing stuff to the post office. I was doing this, I was doing that. I was occupied, but I got nothing done.
But you weren't
And
actually focusing on a project.
Exactly. And so I completely reversed and tried to get a list together of things that I'm interested in. Now that's a pretty difficult, that's more difficult to do than it sounds. Like, what is it that I'm actually wanting to do? And in my case, I went back to business diaries and looked for places where I complained about, oh, I don't have enough time, I would like to pursue this or that. But eventually I got a list together, and then I ordered that list for importance. Super important things got 5 hours a week. Less important things got half an hour or an hour a week. And I made a schedule very much like in kindergarten or like in grade school. Like, you know, Monday 9 to 11, this one. 11 to 1, this one. And after a couple of months, I didn't need that schedule anymore because there were so many projects brewing and working that I could throw the schedule away. But that worked really well. And I did 3 1-year sabbaticals so far. And each and every one of them was really productive and enjoyable.
Oh, that's really great advice. Okay, so start with structure and you don't know what could come from that.
That's, and it's, you know, meaning like if it would just be me with my German accent, I would say, well, that's probably because I was, you know, born so close to the German border that that's just how the structure I need. But I doubt that now. I've read so many biographies of people who create, be it writers, be it artists, be it musicians. Last night I saw this beautiful little doc called Leonard and Marianne and Leonard. It's a documentary about the love story of Leonard Cohen and Marianne, like, you know, the woman he sings about. Beautiful, small little doc, great. And of course, it comes out Leonard Cohen had a structure. Even when he was doing LSD all the time on this Greek island, even there he had a 3-page pensum that he had to write every single day.
Wow. Well, I'm a list
seems
person.
That there is almost no, I don't think, but the people that I know and the people I read about, they all have a structure.
I appreciate that. I'm a list person, so I get it.
It seems to work.
Yeah. So kind of jumping off that, how have you been staying creatively engaged, both with your work and the design community, you know, during this time?
I'm meaning that, basically last summer, we put all of the commercial design work on Jessica Volch's very capable shoulders. So in a way, you know, since last August, I've been within a quite nimble, very, very lean studio, basically working with freelancers. And there, nothing has changed. I'm still doing that. It's wonderful. And I'm engaged with a couple of freelancers, but there has been, from a daily perspective, there has been surprisingly little change in my day, with some added advantages, as in that I don't get interrupted as often. It's like, you know, you really can get the whole morning done from 8 until 1 without a single phone call. I find it productive. Yeah.
Great. So then you spent 6 or 7 years working on your film, The Happy Film. And I remember watching it a while back, actually, after you had come to Seattle and spoke at the Civilization Design Lectures. And you made a comment to the effect of, like, at the beginning, this is a film about me trying to find happiness. And it seems like, you know, right now, a lot of people are really grasping to find that or looking for ways to get any kind of happiness. So I'm curious, what have you learned about the idea of happiness, and do you feel you've achieved it? And what are your advice for people seeking a happier life right now?
Well, here is the deal. Before I even started the film, I read a book called The Happiness Hypothesis by a guy called Jonathan Haidt. And I read about 50 books because I prepared for the film. And I just found that this to be the best one.
Okay.
And I contacted Jonathan, and he agreed to become the scientific supervisor or the advisor of the film. And he is in the film, and he's the person, if you saw the film, that there's quite some back and forwards between the two of us. And Jonathan, in that book, already has a conclusion of what he thinks what the nature of happiness really is. And I read that conclusion, and I've heard him, because we interviewed him a number of times for the film, I mean, actually many times for the film, I've heard him repeat that conclusion many times.
Okay.
And I didn't get it until about 3 years after we were done with the film. And I think that the problem with happiness is that at least in my case, I had to go through the exercises and troubles and directions myself. Reading about it in somebody else's book didn't really make a difference for me. So basically, I could have quoted the same thing I'm going to tell you now 10 years ago, because I read it in Jonathan's book.
Right.
The big difference is just that in those 10 years, I experienced all this myself. And now understand it. And even though I do now understand it, it doesn't mean that I permanently understand it. I forget it again.
Right.
And
well, that's being human.
I get back to it again. It's just, nevertheless, I'm going to tell you what I've learned.
Okay.
Which is pretty much the same thing that Jonathan has learned, knowing that it probably isn't all that meaningful, because you might not even believe it, or you might not have the angle to actually apply it in your daily life.
Right.
But I'm telling it anyway.
Okay.
So Jonathan's theory is, and that when I was on sabbatical in Mexico, I deeply got it. So basically, he says that there are 3 big areas that really have the maximum influence on your life. One of them, and probably most important, is relationships. And this means your relationship to your lover, your family, your friends, but also to very far away acquaintances, people that you might have just met a couple of times.
Right.
And the goal really is not to pursue happiness, but the goal is to get those relationships on as good of a level as you can. And if you do that, then certain kind of happinesses will materialize magically from in between those relationships when you don't expect it, and specifically not when you pursue it. And then you can do the same with your work. Like, try to lift your work situation on a level as high as you can. And the same will happen. And then the third one would be a area that's bigger than yourself. For some people, that's religion. For other people, that might be a bigger question, be it global warming or the current crisis, but something that is bigger than yourself, and engage in that and try to get that onto a level where certain happinesses might come out by themselves when you're not planning or expecting or pursuing them.
Interesting.
And that is meaning, it's sort of, at the same time, it sounds trivial and kind of obvious, but it's really true. It's really true. It's I think it's one of those truths that were there since probably thousands of years. I wouldn't be surprised to find, you probably find something similar in Plato. And the difficulty is how to communicate that for other people or to yourself, that you really get it, that you really can live that. And I would say that I'm not particularly great in all directions, but I definitely, it comes to my mind here and there. Like, can I push the situation of my work life onto a level? Can I improve the situation of my work life? And in my case, that was possible. Meaning, I'm privileged, and
Right.
our studio was well known. Like, I probably have more agency about how to finagle the situation of my work life than many other people do.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think that everybody can improve it. I'm not sure if everybody has quite that agency, but I think that everybody can improve it. And I think that if you can make improvements in the personal, in the work, and in the something that's bigger than your life, then chances that little happinesses will appear when you don't expect them is just much bigger.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Sometimes I feel like we overthink things like that, and I feel like this situation, especially, it's interesting, has really made me kind of reevaluate all of the friendships and relationships and just the people in my life that I don't want to say I took them for granted, because that sounds bad, but the things that I maybe focus on, all the time in my life, I was like, no, like, this really stripped back a lot and has made me realize like what's important, and it's kindness and connection with people. And that sounds silly because I don't want to make it sound like I wasn't aware of that before, but like you said, like, being in these situations and having to live them makes it so real. So so I know that everybody wants out of quarantine, obviously, but what would you say has been maybe a positive for you during this time, or something that you have maybe like learned about yourself?
Well, I'd say that there's definitely a couple of people in my life that I like even better now than I did before.
That's good.
I'd say I'd leave it at that. I think that's a big enough thing. I would say
that's
that
great.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Great. I'll take it. And then kind of pulling back and, in what ways, I mean, obviously we all know, and we're all already seeing that there's great economic effects that this is having, on the design industry, but do you see it having like any other kind of effects, whether it's about the way people work or, what do you kind of see for the future, the next year, the next 2 years?
Well, I would say that's the obvious ones. I mean, very clearly, I think a lot of design companies will realize that their large offices aren't as necessary for them doing business as they thought it would be. I mean, I don't think that now the entire design community will work from home, but I think that there are certain aspects or certain time frames, or there will be new ways of working that I think that this is a long enough time for certain things really to work out and to be figured out. That my guess would be that there's going to be a good number of design companies who will say, actually, we don't need an office, or we need a much smaller office, because these and these and these kind of people can really work from elsewhere. We've actually had that with a couple of designers even way before that. I mean, a designer that I'm working with right now was always traveling the world. And we worked remotely, and he's a conscientious, reliable person. So even if he's in Thailand or in Finland or wherever, we can get things done. And it worked 2 years ago, and of course, it works now.
Yeah, great. So one of the things that I've been really kind of heartened by seeing is the way that people are stepping up and pitching in and just trying to help. They say, in kind of situations like this, brings out the best in people and the worst in people. I like focusing on bringing out the best in people. So I'm curious, is there any, individual, nonprofit, charity group, like anybody that's really inspired you by, what they're doing, who you maybe want to give a shout out or a little recognition to?
I think that there's a Dutch group called What Design Can Do. I think they start to do proper things.
Okay.
My overall guess is specifically for design community is that the things that we do, like all design, should be part functional and part joyful. Design that's only functional is too little, it's too close to engineering, and it doesn't ultimately satisfy us, neither as the makers, but particularly not as the users. Things that when things only work, it's just not good enough. And they normally don't work as well as they could if there would be a joyous, beautiful element to them. And at the same time, the same thing is true for vice versa. If things just look good, but they don't really do much, it's not very good either.
Right.
And I've seen, significant parts of the design community now do logos for the virus, or do, little signs that say, keep the distance and social distancing and things like that, preferably with widely spaced letter spacing.
Right.
And I think that is totally fine if your goal is just to keep yourself occupied, but these things don't really do much. The functionality factor of them is very, very little. Or I've just been invited, and I said no, to a poster series to do a poster about social distancing. Now, for one thing, I know that the people who do this series will likely not have the budget to put these posters up in any sort of way that it would make a difference.
Right.
But also, I think that social distancing doesn't need to be really communicated right now. I think that if you have not heard about social distancing in the media, you're not going to see the poster in some design gallery that it's likely going to wind up with.
Right, right.
So I would love if the community would pivot from these kind of projects into projects that are actually useful, but in a joyful sort of manner. And I'll give you a tricky example.
Okay.
Let's say after 9/11 in New York, there were many designers who created 9/11 logos, preferably exchanging the number 11 against the Twin Towers. I've seen hundreds of those.
Yeah.
In the past 20 years, I have not seen significant efforts on how to actually help for the downsides of what 9/11 brought. For example, like the security measures at the New York airports are as bad 20 years later as they've been when it actually happened.
Right.
Meaning if 3 months ago you went to JFK, the tables, the steel.
Shoot, we're having some connection issues.
All right, so are we back on?
Yes, we're back.
Okay, let's see if I can balance this phone on my self-made little stand here. If this can work. Oh, this doesn't work right now, but maybe it works like this. Yeah, balance. Okay, perfect.
Great.
So, so basically if you went to JFK a couple of months ago, the steel tables before the scanner where you move your luggage through,
right,
were 20 years after 9/11 still not on the same level. So every traveler's luggage got hooked on every step of the level. And in 20 years, not only did anybody ever redesign this, but nobody even had a box of matches or a little piece of paper that they could put underneath one of those tables to make that thing even.
Right, right, right.
And I'm sure there will be an incredible amount of downsides coming out of this crisis.
Yeah.
And I think it would be absolutely our job to figure out what these downsides are and what we can design to actually mitigate those.
Right, right. So you're sending out a design brief to all the designers now.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's my duty to brief all designers, but I think it's if we all think a little bit about what is actually needed.
Yeah.
I think that is good for us because it's just much more fun to work on something that's meaningful than it is to work on some logo thing that you post on your Instagram.
Yeah.
And it's of course much more useful for the general public. And there is, you know, who knows, there might even be a chance to actually make a business out of it if it's really needed.
Yeah, yeah. Great. So to wrap things up here, at the end of every interview we do this kind of little lightning round where we ask our speakers, everyone gets asked the same 5 questions.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and do that. Question number 1, what is one thing you do to get out of a creative block?
Change projects, go from one to the other.
Great. Number 2, what did you want to be at age 5?
A priest.
Wow, okay, there's a story behind that one.
Yeah.
Number 3, who is someone that has shaped your life professionally?
Oh, Tibor Kalman.
Okay. Number 4, what are 3 objects on your desk at all times?
An espresso cup, a glass with sparkling water, and a sketchbook.
Very European. And number 5, what is the best advice you've ever received?
That came from that designer from Tibor Kalman, and it was the only difficult thing when running a design company is to figure out how not to grow. Everything else is easy.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Well, Stefan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Perfect.
We got, you know, a ton of people watching, and I think everybody had, you know, just you had some great advice. And for everybody watching, just to let you know, tomorrow at 12 noon West Coast time, we'll have architect Bryony Roberts on, and she's wonderful. She just got nominated for the Wheelwright Prize at Harvard, so definitely tune in. Well, Stefan, stay safe,
Rachel,
stay creative, and have a great rest of your day.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have
Bye.
a great afternoon. Thanks.